There we go. So, masculine archetypes. Just want to briefly go over them so we're all in the same ballpark here. And this is shining light on shadows. So we're always looking at the archetype, and this and shadow work is the way I view it is as an umbrella. And under that umbrella sits a lot of different activities, a lot of different ways that we can look at our shadows. The obvious and probably the most known ones are meditation and journaling. And why do we do that? We meditate and we journal on those events that have triggered us, those emotional events that come up. If we're always looking positively, we're never going to deal with the things that are stopping us, that are holding us back. Working with your imposter syndrome or your lack of self-worth or any of these issues that might come up at any sort of level for you. You weren't born with them, you acquired them, and these are what has created our shadows. And this is where the shadow work comes in. So under that umbrella, journaling, meditation, there's also the shadow archetypes. It's a whole other section that I'm looking at. Actually, it's gone on for a couple of weeks now. And we'll also look at values, levels, spiral dynamics, integral theory, and what I underpin it all with is client-led theory. So today we're just going to touch on one of the aspects of archetypes, and that's the masculine archetypes, their shadows. But some of the practical actions and activities that we can put in place, that we can do to actually change, start to integrate, start to work on our shadows not having that influence over us. Now, shadows are the things that we depress, we deny, we suppress, we deny, we ignore in ourselves. And just the mere fact of meditating or journaling on them, a lot of them, that integrates them. Just shining a light on those shadows releases them, if you like, releases them from the dark. But in personal development, the biggest part, half of personal development work is self-awareness. So we start to do personal development. This is a challenge I have with personal development. We start to become aware of the reasons that we're not achieving what we want, the reasons that we're not manifesting, the reasons that we're not getting that law of attraction going. I can put all these things in place to manifest what I want, but it doesn't happen. Why not? Because deep down, under the surface, the conscious, there's the blocks, there's the shadows that we have in place that really, you can get informations telling you you're great, you're beautiful, you're beautiful, you're beautiful. But if your unconscious says you're not, then your unconscious is really what's creating your reality. So I was talking to someone last week, actually. When you look in the mirror, who are you seeing? Or what are you seeing? You're seeing the creator of your reality. But it's not on the surface. We can't just paint it over or try and polish the mirror to change that reality. We have to go deeper. This is why we look at the shadows. This is why we shine the light on their shadows. So the matura, the archetype and the light archetype, the archetype in their fullness. Now I've spent weeks going over archetypes. I'm not going to go into where they've come from and all that background sort of stuff. We're just going to skip through a brief masculine overview of those archetypes and then some of the practical things we can put in place. So the masculine archetypes, the active and the negative poles. So we have two opposing shadows with them, just like the feminine archetypes. So if we look at the first one, the sovereign, the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover, we look at the first one, and it's interesting actually because the feminine archetypes, as I said last week, the archetypes are not written in stone. This is not how you perceive, it's how you've been told. You have your own archetypes, and we get these labels and we sort of hang stuff on them, and we what I call facilitator led. Really important when you're looking deeper, more in depth at your archetypes, that you figure out your archetypes. Who are you turning up as, and who do you want to be? These are archetypes that you can become aware of. So these are just labels: king, warrior, magician, lover, the queen, the mother, the wise woman, and the lover. They're the feminine archetypes. The masculine archetypes: the sovereign, the king, the shadows of the tyrant and the weakling. And remember, what I was saying about the archetypes. We don't sit, we aspire to sit at the archetype in their fullness, the sovereign. But invariably, if we're young, if we're immature, if we're inexperienced, we're going to sit somewhere closer to those shadows. So it's really, you know, Tony Robbins says the quality of your life is relative to the quality of the questions that you ask. And it's not. It's the quality of the questions that you ask that you hold yourself accountable to. So who am I being when I look at the sovereign archetype? Who am I really being and really being honest with yourself, holding yourself accountable? And as far as the sovereign goes, it's actually really difficult to be in that sovereign in those key moments. If we're just tooling along in life, mostly asleep, we're not awake all the time. It's in those key moments when an event happens and we can be triggered, or we can actually wake up and become aware. Why am I doing that? Now, what normally happens is we go, why did I do that? In hindsight, we look back and we wonder why we reacted like that. Really being able to step into your archetype and their fullness is a situation comes up. So there's a journey that you go through. The first part is that why did I do that in hindsight? That's when your archetypes are running anyway and you're not aware of them. You start the personal development stuff, you start to become aware of what you're actually doing. Bit of work, you start to bit more personal development work, you start to become more aware of who you're actually turning up as. Now, you'd like to turn up as the archetype and the fullness, but really honestly, when you're being honest with yourself, maybe not quite. And the sovereign comes with experience. And you'll see that when I look at when we look at some of the practical aspects. The sovereign is the archetype, the person that you want to be when an event comes up, so that you're not hiding from it, you're not acknowledging it, you're stepping forward to, without force, take control of the situation. And that's that latter part of that journey when it's an unconscious, you're unconsciously competent at it. So you go through the personal development, you become conscious, consciously aware of what you're not doing or what you are doing. And then you go into this conscious competence phase where you start to work on putting the aspects into play to become that archetype and their fullness. And then it becomes unconscious. So this is that part where we're starting to become consciously incompetent. We're starting to become aware of what we don't know. To start to become aware of who I'm turning up as. Why I'm turning up as that is the next part of the journey. So the sovereign, the tyrant, the weakling. So where do you sit in that triangle? We go on to the next one, the warrior. Whoops, the warrior. The two shadows here are the saddest and the masochist. And it's in with journaling, if you're journaling, it's when an event happened today, how did I react? It's noticing those triggers. Now, it's life's a little bit like an onion, you'll become aware of the top players. This thing triggered me. I don't know why it triggered me, but it triggered me. Okay, and then we start to look at it a little bit, and then maybe we start to peel that layer away. There's another layer. So this is a journey. There's very few therapies, there's very few interventions that can dig down through that onion peel to those core emotional events. And when I say significant emotional events, I'm not talking about trauma with the big T. Trauma with the big T are those events that have been defining life-threatening. When you're mature enough, and that can happen really young in life, in your teenage years, when you're aware or I almost died, car accident, major life-threatening event. That's trauma with the big T. That's a different sort of body of work. What we're looking at here is trauma with the small t, significant emotional events invariably in our young life, and this is why one of those things that comes up under the umbrella is inner child work. When we're really young, we're sitting in a non-dual state, so everything's one. My pain's your pain, and we're not able at that stage to process, critical think events that are happening, but we're certainly able to absorb and notice the energy. So mum and dad are having an argument. The content of the argument is not something that I can process. Usually it's pre-verbal, so it's not even something I can process, but I definitely get a feel of the energy. Then I pick up a key word, money, horrible feeling, money, horrible feeling. the emotional hook is there with money. And then I grow up and I'm 20 or 30 or even older, my age, and I have a an attitude about money, a negative attitude, a limiting belief about money. Well, where did that come from? It came from that really young event that I couldn't understand the argument, but I could certainly hook onto the emotion. And at 25, the issue of money comes up. It's the emotion that's the first thing that comes up, the emotion with that money, and this is where we find the blocks. At 25, I'm dealing with the interaction with the person and the money. That's that layer of the onion. Peel that away, work on it, journal it, then maybe we move to the next layer. So the warrior, the sadist, the masochist, the magician, the manipulator, the innocent. So all of these archetypes have their archetypical nature in their fullness, but also these shadows, these things that are holding us back from honestly taking on the archetype in its fullness. We tend to not play full out. I was listening to Marianne Williamson the other day. That's a great line. I'm not going to remember it, am I? It's not the fear of standing out. It's the fear of what we could now. I'll butcher it if I say it. And the lover, the addict, and the impotent. Now, we have all these archetypes within us, both masculine and feminine. Now, in a masculine person, someone who's more masculine, they're the archetypes that are going to tend a person that's more feminine. The feminine archetype is going to predominate, and only one or two of them will predominate, and there's a balance between them. But there's a balance between the masculine and the feminine, and one of the basic rules of the universe of life is that everything is seeking balance. So if we're not in these archetypes and their fullness, there's a dis-ease that we're dealing with. We're doing something, an event happens, we get triggered, we're uncomfortable, but we react to the trigger, we behave. The person is not their behavior. I'm not my behavior, but where that behavior came from. And this is why we call it the golden shadow. And I'm hoping in a few weeks we'll be I'll be having different people on this platform, shadow workers, to discuss their angles and the way that they deal with shadows and shadow work. And one of the ones I hope to be talking to will be talking about golden shadows. Shadows are not the bad thing. All bad things that have happened to us, the imposter syndrome, the self-worth issue. I could have been a great singer. That's one of my attributes, the gold. But when I was really young, I learned that that's not something that we do in my part of where I lived in my culture. So I suppressed it. I denied it. By releasing it, by realizing it, I can bring that gold to the surface and actually have a life that I can love, a life that I can love effectively, yes. So shadows are not all dark. There's the golden shadows as well. Okay, so let me come out of that. No, it's sovereign leadership. Taking on responsibility, being authentic. The trouble with these activities is that they'll trigger you if you're not ready for them. When am I not being authentic? So the first part of self-awareness is self-awareness. So take this as the self-awareness part. Noticing when I'm not taking responsibility, when I'm not being authentic. And showing up so that I own my power and owning my imperfections. This is as sovereign as somebody who's comfortable in their own skin. And as a coach, as a trainer, being in your sovereign in their fullness is going to change the dynamic of the relationship with anybody you're interacting with. Particularly with the coach, when you're looking to inspire, when you're looking with a coachee, when you're looking with a client, you're looking to inspire them. You're looking to inspire them to look at their own values, the purpose, their vision. If you're imparting this, that you've taken on your own vision, then this is what you're going to be putting out. This is what the client's going to be taking on. So noticing when you're doing that, when you're not doing that. Journaling after a client interaction, or if you're training, how you interact with the people in the audience. Journaling the points that come up, and it's something that needs to be done regularly because you start to notice systems and patterns in place. Life, the brain, The unconscious works in patterns. So it's that self-awareness of the patterns we're running. So something else that the sovereign does is to balance the other archetypes. So the sovereign is like the one in charge, and look, the sovereign is looking to balance the other energies. So balancing the warrior. The warrior has the energy, the power, not the force, because the warrior in their immaturity, in their shadow, is going to be using force. But what we're looking is balancing that power, and like sovereign, to balance, to work with the warrior in their fullness, in their power. The warrior in their power is somebody that doesn't need to unsheath their sword. They're in control because they're there. They can step forward, whereas the sovereign is in their power, in control. They don't need to use their presence in stepping forward. They just are. So the warrior archetype brings courage. It brings assertiveness, strong boundaries. They're decisive with their choices. And the sovereign is a character, is an archetype that's going to be pulling on these strengths. So you're working with a client, as a coach, as a trainer, you've set those boundaries. You know when to say no. You can stand up for yourself. You're in control of the situation. Now, that doesn't mean you're dictating or you're controlling the situation. You're in control of yourself, and thereby that gives you control of the situation. See, these archetypes are something you really have to sit down and work out what it means for you. Not reading a piece of paper that somebody's given you or what I'm describing on here. These are just ideas and concepts, if you like. So the sovereign is somebody that taps into their magician creativity as well. The magician is the creative, the intuit, the one that uses their imagination. So this is a character. These characteristics that the sovereign would draw on. To draw on the intuitive nature, to draw on their imagination, to co-create with the clients, with the person that they're interacting with in the relationship. As a sovereign, you're encouraging the client in a coaching relationship to innovate their own solutions, to look at new perspectives. It's quite funny how it's really difficult to think outside the box. This is something that the sovereign is holding in their hand, is presenting to the client. And then the lover archetype. Again, the sovereign is somebody that has all these other archetypes within them, and they can use them and touch on them if you like, whenever it's the right situation to use it. So the lover archetype is one that shows compassion, empathy, openness. Sovereign, no, we could say like a mentor, somebody that's growing along the journey with you, with your client. You're interacting with the client on that journey. You can say that the warrior is somebody that's holding them accountable. The sovereign is somebody that's holding them accountable by being. I almost ran out of time last week. I don't want to spend too much time on this, and we're going through it. I thought I'd break this down and it wouldn't take me too long, but it is. So many exercises, if we look at what you can do to notice the sovereign when it's coming up, when it's not. So if we talk about journaling, we're talking about reflection. So journaling on when you're being responsible, the self-responsible, when you're cultivating self-awareness, when you're cultivating ownership, when the things that you're doing, your behaviors, your actions are presenting this. So journaling isn't all about noticing the triggers. Journaling isn't noticing some of the behaviors, the things that you're exemplifying during the day. See, the thing is that one of the beliefs I have is that the unconscious wants to run patterns. So what it does is it knows that if it's shouted at, it cringes. And that's a pattern it runs. It's a shadow. It's not a helpful pattern. And it does that automatically. You know, this is why we say people are asleep. They're just running on automatic. But you can't just, so the first part is recognizing that, okay, I'm being triggered. This is what I'm doing. I'm not being that archetype in its fullness. but I'm running this pattern. So how do I change a pattern? Now, the challenge is that you don't want to just scribble it out or make it too hard to access because you then have dealt with the surface issue. You've dealt with the result, not the cause. You really need to look at the inner child work. You really need to look at the core emotional event that's created that block that you've got. So we're at that phase here where we're just noticing when I'm showing responsibility, when I'm owning the situation. So the positive stuff. We look at there's a balance here. We need to look at the positive as well as the things that I'm being triggered on. So journal on things like personal values, purpose, areas that you feel responsible. See, and we can run down a list of values. These are the values I'd like to have. But again, the quality of your life is how accountable you hold yourself. So noticing what do you really value. And you can't sit in a classroom and do a 30-minute exercise to figure this out. This is something that comes up when you're triggered. So I was triggered and I did that. So, okay, why did I do that? Because I value that more. Positive or negative values. So explore some of the values. Explore when you're being a sovereign, especially in the coaching practice. The coaching practice puts you in a dynamic relationship with the client. One of the things I always try with the client is to keep it dynamic, keep it moving, because they're evolving and developing. So they're moving, and you need to be moving as a quality coach, as a high-performing coach, moving with them, encouraging them, not necessarily leading them, but definitely not pushing. Another thing you do as an exercise is to visualize the crown as the sovereign. So visualizing the crown is visualizing embracing leadership confidently, being a confident leader. So I said before that, we run these unconscious patterns. A lot of them don't help us. What we need to do is instill positive patterns so that when an event happens, the unconscious can go, well, I used to do that. So what initially happens there at the start of the journey is that an event happens, mind, the unconscious does that behavior. We go into personal development, we started off, the event happens, and we're confused because we know that that's what we normally do, but that's not what we should be doing, and it's not helpful. Okay, so visualizing, embracing leadership confidently, how I would act in this situation gives the unconscious some more tools, if you like, some more processes that could run. So when that event happens, it will become eventually unconsciously competent so that's what it does. So you are embodying and displaying that sovereign behavior. Decision-making practices. Well, that's decisive with the warrior. The sovereign needs to be able to as well to make those decisive decisions. So again, noticing when you're not doing it and when you are doing it, what you can put in place to do it. What we're looking for here with the sovereign is to develop leadership skills, develop resilience. Leadership, the sovereign archetype, comes with maturity. Age and maturity can be two different things, but it's the maturity we're looking for. And if you stand still, if you're not doing the self-development, your culture is developing your leadership skills. And if you interact with a whole lot of leaders, if you're on the C-suite in the company, then that's the environment. That's how your maturity is going to evolve. If you're working in a different environment where it's free for all in the pub on a Friday night, if that's the environment that you work in where there's no leadership, that's where your leadership's going to go. So your maturity will never reach that sovereign level because you're not familiar with it. You're not getting outside stimulus, outside intention, if you like. Let's go on to the warrior. I can see these, you can't. So the warrior, the sadist and the masochist. So now we're hanging this label called warrior as the masculine archetype. And again, this is a masculine archetype. Women have these, females have these archetypes as well. They're just not as evolved. They may have evolved them feminine archetypes more. So we take this as much as you want to, as much as you need to. So embracing the warrior. So some of the practice, embracing the warrior within. So what are we doing here? The warrior in their fullness is somebody that's going to be recognizing their own inner strength. It's somebody that's going to be recognizing this inner strength in their client, in the person that they're interacting with. They're going to be somebody that's noticing the resilience, the courage, themselves, and the person that they're interacting with. And the shadow warrior, one of those two shadows there, is somebody that, rather than recognizing their inner strength and their resilience, is someone that's tending towards aggression or intimidation. So aggression within themselves. And this might not be, and this is not black and white, this is sort of a continuum, and intimidation. So journaling, when you're interacting with someone, how are you really reacting? Are you reacting? What are you saying about them? And this is unconscious. What are you thinking about them? What are you sensing about them? So the warrior, you need to look for that balance and compassion, that balance from compassion and boundaries. So you want to hold the space for the person, but you want to be able to say no. So it's understanding in being able to exude empathy and compassion, being supportive. Holding space is a really fascinating one. We could do a whole session on holding space. Or do you tend to address or work with over-identifying with the client? An awful lot of coaches haven't dealt with their shadows, and when the client does go into meltdown, they support that meltdown. They get drawn into the coaches, into the clients, or the person they're talking to. They get drawn into their pain because they haven't dealt with it themselves, so they get triggered by it, and their behavior becomes what it's always been with that pain. So setting those healthy boundaries is really important for the warrior. Being authentic, being able to harness creativity, wisdom, and thinking about hope and navigating realism. These are all things that the warrior is going to be looking at. So some of the things, the practical things, are assertiveness training. How assertive are you? Noticing your reactions and how can you change that? How disciplined are you with challenges? Do you do what you say you're going to do? So again, with journaling, it's self-reflection. Self-reflecting on when I'm being strong, when I've set the boundaries, when I say when I do what I'm saying. How good are you at conflict resolution without using the force, the aggression, the intimidation, actually holding the space, role-playing scenarios, addressing conflict, but not coming down to push people into that. The shadow will tend towards the aggression or avoidance. The warriors, the sadist, the masochist, they'll either go in the shadows, they'll either move into aggression or they'll move into avoidance. They'll avoid the problem. Well, avoiding the problem is not dealing with the problem. So that's not the warrior in their fullness. I think I'm just about out of time tonight. I'm going to have to carry this one on next week. That's interesting. Okay, so I'll carry on next week with this because this is fascinating. Some of the skills. This will go up on my YouTube channel. So subscribe. It'll be down there somewhere. And put a note, put a comment on there, and I will send you the details, the hard copy of these notes on the warrior, the practicalities and some of the skills the warrior that you could use to evolve and develop your warrior. All right, until next week or on the YouTube channel if you're looking there during the week.